there's no one structure that you have to use for an artist statement. It's very open. It's very, whatever works for the information you're trying to convey. It does need to have a very clear structure because it's a very brief document, sometimes a paragraph even, sometimes most often about a page. I'm going to give you two different structures that you can use, but they're not the right ways. You can do a different structure than this if you want. But here's just a couple so that you can have something to start with. Structure one is just your basic storytelling order, which is beginning, middle, end. Seems really simple, but it's a really great way to write an artist statement. So your beginning is your introduction, and this needs to be interesting and open-ended. In this structure, you're going to be doing the thing where your first sentence is going to be one of those catch your attention sort of sentences. But it needs to lead somewhere. So whatever you write in the beginning section of this structure needs to be sort of the guiding principles of your work that you're wanting to focus on in this artist statement. And I'll give you some examples, two different examples of this structure here in a minute. But it needs to be, because you're building on the introduction in the rest of the artist statement, you need to make sure that it's something that you want to spend your entire artist statement talking about, or at least related to that. So the middle portion is your discussion section where you're going to get more into what you introduced in the beginning. And then at the end, you're going to try to circle back around to where you started, because that's a really simple way to conclude this structure, or just sort of go a step further than what you were talking about in your discussion section. But just end in a really poignant way. So here's a couple of examples of folks doing this, and we'll talk a little bit about it. So the first is a visual artist. The second is a performer, which it's really long, so I'll just kind of skip through it, but we'll read this one. This is a visual artist, beginning, middle, and end structure. I don't use color in my work because I'm not done exploring gray. Let's see. An achromatic palette leads me to work in mixed media. The blackest blacks and the whitest whites are ink and acrylic paint. Grays are pencil, charcoal, watercolor, and pastel. Scientists tell us that black is the absence of all colors and white is the presence of all colors. So I consider gray to be what exists between absence and presence. Okay, so that's a very poetic beginning. That first sentence is very catchy, gets my attention. And that whole paragraph is talking about the same thing, which is color, black, white, and gray. But then in the middle paragraph, they build on that by changing to their what. So what is their subject, right? Their beginning paragraph is kind of like their how, but also a little bit of what. So that idea works well with my preferred subject, the human face. I draw faces enlarged to the point where they resemble topographical maps, rendering a geography of scars and pores and idiosyncratic identifiers. Yet the viewer cannot identify an individual. And then we build on that. Every sentence makes sense with the sentence that came before, but it gets a little bit into the why. I like the paradox of the close-up that looks like a distant view. It's the way we see most of the people who surround us. They are right in front of us, but we can't truly tell who they are, or we don't care. They exist in the gray zone between absence and presence. And then that's a perfect example. That last sentence comes right back around to the first sentence and gives it a sense of completion there at the end. The next example is a performer example. Again, I'm not going to read this whole thing because it's super long. And this is cut down from the source where I sourced it from. But and both of these examples are on your handout as well. The commuters on my 6:57 a.m. Metro Rail ride are the characters I play on stage. The scene is an odd mosaic of people scattered throughout the train car, each preoccupied with their own inner monologue. This is where I do my character research. By treating the world as my classroom, I find truth in my acting. And then they start to go through a list of the types of people that they see: the single mother, the dozing homeless man, the medical intern, et cetera, et cetera. And then the next paragraph says, this hasn't always been my strategy, and gives a little bit of history for this actor. What has their goal been? How has it shifted? So that sort of verges on into the biographical a little bit. But also gets into their why. They want to make people feel something. That's their main goal, and they're communicating that here. And then it says, by finding truth in my acting, the audience can empathize with my character's struggle. If I establish a connection between my character and the viewer, the catharsis my teachers talked about in their schooling can happen, but it will not be mine. It will be the viewers, the person who relates to, and then they repeat that list of types of people on the train that they mentioned before. So that's a really nice way to sort of put a button on it, coming back around to something you mentioned early on in your artist narrative or your artist statement. And also gets to the how, the why, and the what. All right. So the second structure I think is really great if you're a creator of any kind. So if you are a composer, if you are an artist, anyone, or you're a playwright, writer, anyone who's a creator, this is really great. Although you can make it work as a performer as well. So it's not off limits to you if you're a performer. But the first paragraph is your medium or your genre. So both what your work is made of and the description of what the audience is seeing or hearing. The second would be your process, so how you arrived at the finished work. And the third part will be your understanding of your work. So write a strong and attention-getting last sentence, because in this structure, you're gonna be starting with something really practical, like I work with styrofoam and paint, right? It's not gonna be like attention grabbing necessarily, like the other structure allows for. So here, try to get that attention grab in at the end, because you're not gonna get it at the beginning. Yeah. All right, so in this one, we're gonna have a visual artist example and then a music composition example, just to give you a couple different perspectives on it. And they're talking about the same title work, and it's very, very similar. So this is visual artist. In Waiting Room, a series of oil on wood paintings, I depict interior spaces that contain atmospheric disturbances. I present a fixed view of a room as if the viewer is standing in the doorway looking in. Each painting changes slightly as the scene within the room changes. The rooms do not contain people, only the things people collect. Okay, so that's just starting by talking about what. Like, what are you seeing, right? What is the art? The next, the process. First, I build models of the rooms from cardboard, found objects, and craft store items. I photograph the models with a stationary camera and paint from the photos. I manipulate the lighting and the objects inside the model room. The blurs and photos interest me greatly, so I often incorporate things that move, like a dollhouse rocking chair and a revolving miniature Christmas tree, to create more blurs, which I then emphasize in paint. My paintings contain both static and dynamic elements. Everything changes, everything passes. Each phase is worth examining. Like transitory mental states, I explore the progression of experience within a fixed field of vision. So that's their understanding of their work, a little bit into their why. And then a very similar, but adapted for if you're a composer. In Waiting Room, an orchestral song cycle, I seek to capture the intimacy of interior spaces through subtle variations in timbral combinations. The voice acts as an ever-present first-person narrator. A viewer is standing in the doorway of a waiting room looking in. Okay, so you get the idea. And this one, it's from a musical composition standpoint. So you're just getting the genre, the how they do what they do, and then at the end, giving that understanding that why in that third paragraph. So again, it's this one for me, it just seems a clear fit for those of you that are creators. But again, if you're a performer, for instance, you can say, in my works, I specialize in this kind of performance art. And then in the middle, you can say, when I'm like that acting example, these are the sorts of things that I do. This is my process. And then at the end, sort of what inspires you to do what you do. You could follow the same one. It just seems like a really good fit for a creator to me.